Thank you for joining in on this session of Real Estate Connect. In this session, we'll be discussing real estate, the evolution of the logistics of the transaction from property ownership to payments for a property. Within this session, we will definitely discuss some of the details and deeper knowledge about Real Estate 6.0, because in Real Estate 6.0, we will be discussing in detail the evolution of the logistics of a transaction. I want you to tune in and ask any questions and engage in the chat session on the side. It's very important that I hear your ideas, your views. Challenge our ideas, please, wherever possible. Real Estate 6.0 is all about the future of what real estate is like. It's a theory and an application, and challenging it is very important because it gets us to more solid knowledge and more solid theory and much better application. If you noticed in previous sessions, we've been discussing and talking about how will the real estate transaction evolve, but more, how will the real estate evolve as an asset class? And as we said, Real Estate 6.0 is an asset class which is way beyond the current asset class we all know, and we've traded, owned, and sold for years. What will be the major change in the new asset class not necessarily undermines or removes any of the characteristics of the current asset class. The asset class will evolve. However, the same asset class will probably exist for a very long period to come. The evolution will create a new asset class without removing or deleting the current existing one. Let's talk about the transaction evolution for the existing and the new, because I believe there will be shared elements of how technology will impact our approach to real estate. Real Estate 6.0 talks about liquefying assets, talks about making real estate as an asset perfect, and we've talked about in previous sessions. It talks about allowing real estate to be more transparent, allowing us buyers, sellers, and everyone in real estate to be able to analyze and decide better on what to buy, what to sell, how and why. At the same time, Real Estate 6.0 allows everyone to have access to the asset that was considered for a very long period of time non-attainable for most. And what we'll discuss today is at the core of that. The evolution of ownership models and payment touches first on your digital identity. Actually, your verified and verifiable digital identity. There's plenty of cities that have started accepting your digital signature and your digital identity as a verifiable identity, as an accepted form of you getting a power of attorney done, thus you being accepted and verified by the legal system. And what will come after that, and have come in plenty of cities similar to Dubai, and it's happening in the US in some states, is your ability to transact fully online. And how does this work? You simply have a digital signature. You've had a digital signature since a very long time. Your digital signature is becoming more important. It's becoming more secure. Technology is being applied to make sure that you are whom you say you are. And when you sign or when you verify a document, you are the real person who is verifying that document in a proper, secure, and legal way. Cities like Dubai have applied the online transactions and transfers around 9 months ago, and now we're in the beginning of 2021. Most of those changes and advancements applied today are transitional. Transferring a property online is transitional. Crowdfunding, in a way or another, is transitional. Tokenization is transitional. Then those tokens of property will sit in liquidity bubbles or liquidity pots and then can be transacted. But all of this is transitional into an open market. for us to reach beyond an over-the-counter transaction, an open market similar to any other equity market, where tokens of property are transmitted, sold, paid for, represent real freehold or leasehold ownership, depending on the country, jurisdiction, and legislation. So what will actually take place is the evolution of the asset class, but also the evolution of how we think of this asset class. I want you to imagine with me the following. You're sitting on your computer or phone, watching me now. You can open another screen. While opening this other screen, it can be a screen that shows you tokens for different properties in the same or different markets. And you can, at the same time, buy an asset in New York, buy another one in London, buy one in Dubai, buy another in Singapore, and buy another in India. You can buy those assets while you're sitting behind screen. You can buy those assets, have full ownership of the portion of the asset that you are owning or that you are purchasing. You can effectively sell this asset. You can effectively transact with this asset. You can take margin on this asset. So for $1,000, you can have probably 100 times leveraging and have $100,000 worth of one of those assets. You can have a portfolio of plenty of assets with an equity of less than $20,000, $30,000 of your own. All of this will allow you to own more property, own property in a more diversified way, and all of this will allow you to simply be able to sell the property you don't need, react to news in a better way, hear the news in a better way, see the impact of the news on property markets, see the impact of the news on a certain property in a property market. This allows you better ability to analyze. More transparency will give us all a better tomorrow within the property sector and industry. You can pay for this asset or for those assets you've purchased in plenty of currencies, including digital currencies. You can pay that so that cross-border payments are simpler, easier, and with less cost. This will not only reduce the cost of you purchasing and of you selling and getting back to a base currency, but will also allow you to take forward all of that within seconds. I want to, however, stop here and discuss the transaction details. So how will that happen on the ground? Because I'm sure you're sitting today in California and you're saying, okay, so in my state, I currently own a house. How can I sell it within that new evolution? How can I sell it attracting and understanding the evolution, attracting new buyers within the revolution? Let me help you understand that better. Currently, your property there is protected with a deed. You have that deed. It's a piece of paper or digital, depending on where you are in the world. Depending on where you are in the world as well, you can today transfer that deed to somebody else, either physically only or physically only and online. Some countries you can only transact it physically being in front of a government employee. In some others, similar to how it happens most parts of the world, there is a trustee or a third party that is in charge of allowing that to happen. And in some others, you can currently transact it fully online. Now let's imagine that that property of yours is 3,000 tokens, 3,000 shares, 3,000 fractions, call it what you wish to call it. Those 3,000 shares, 3,000 fractions can be bought each through a deed, similar to how you buy it today. Let's say that the seller and the buyer have a digital identity that can be verifiable online. So you're the seller, you're in California, I'm a buyer, I'm in Dubai, I want to buy that property or that token or that fraction from you today, and plenty others would like to do it from all over the world. If that is verifiable, it's simple for me to own a fraction of that property if your state allows you to have that property in multiple fractions. So if your state allows you to have 100 title deeds or 1,000 title deeds for fractions of that property, your state is allowing you in a transitional period to do what we are talking about over here. So you have a fraction, and that fraction can be transacted. So today, let's say it can be transacted through a regular online presence, through a verifiable digital ID, or physically being present in front of a trustee, in front of a third party, in front of a notary, or in front of a government employee. Tomorrow, we can take that token and place it on a market where I can buy it openly at any moment of time. That token, that title that is represented by that token, is registered under me as a digital identity. So I own that title of that fraction, or of 10 fractions, or of 50 fractions. I bought it, I paid for it, as I said, currently or in a transitional period through a liquidity pot, but in the future through an open market. I paid for it, you received that money. Now you can be an individual through an institution or an institution. Does it matter? It matters very little. Yes, in the transitional period, probably only institutions would be able to hold such assets or facilitate such transactions. In the future, you should be as an individual able to do so. So you sold a fraction of your property. Now what governs that property afterwards is that property sold with dimensions of what happens prior or post ownership? If yes, then you, as an owner of that property, should simply make sure that those terms are clear to a buyer. How would we standardize that and normalize that and neutralize that? We would create clear understandings that mean if it's a grade A, category 5 property, earning 8%, it means it's managed by a third-party institution. Category 5, let's say, would mean that that property is managed for the coming 10 years. Earning 8% means that it is currently earning a net of 8% after all fees. Managed for 10 years may mean in a subcategory that property has a long-term lease. And then as a risk category 3 means that contract is breakable or not breakable. So all of those and much more elements can show us a standardized approach to what that token represents as ownership and as return. Because property in general is guided by the return it does, property values we mean, by the return it does and by the asset it represents and the future prospects of that asset. So simply, let's go a step backwards. You want to sell that asset. I can buy a portion of that asset online, similar to how I buy an equity or a stock or a share in a company anywhere in the world. I can have clear understanding of what is represented in that or with that token. I can have a clear understanding of what does that token represent as ownership and as return. Now, I'll take you back to different industries similar to fractional ownership today, which is a form of timeshare, private residence clubs. They use, I'm sure most of you know timeshare. That is also, and that used to be an evolution in a way or other. And you know in timeshare there's floating, non-floating weeks. In timeshare, there's people who buy credit, there's people who buy ownership, there's people who buy the ability to use for a certain time. All of those are types of ownership in a timeshare transaction. If we look at all of this and we understand what happened to our property industry and how did parts of it evolve over time, we see how is real estate 6.0 possible. And how is that transaction possible online as a token? Now, let's talk about how you pay for it and how others can purchase it from you. And why is that important? I pay for it. Now, I paid online. How did the money get to you? Currently, if you sell a share and I buy a share, you are selling a share that goes into the market. When I buy it and pay for it in the market, that money goes back to you. In a similar system, it's a swap system. Actually, it's one of the oldest systems. It's a kind of barter. That is how we will be able to swap money or currency or any form of digital currency to a token of property. If you notice, post that point, there is a similarity between a current token of a currency or a currency and a token of a property in the future. The similarity is that both of them are digital asset, or at least the front end is a digital asset, and the back end, it represents an ownership of something, which makes currency one of the weakest of them, because at most times currently it only represents a federal promise, which holds water but not as much as a physical asset. Now, how will that impact the current product that we have and that we deal with, the current asset class, real estate today? It will create a major impact, because similar to how you are paying for a fraction of a property online with this simplicity, you can pay for a whole property online with this simplicity. Similar to how you own and you register to your name a small fraction of a property, you can and you will be able to register under your name a whole asset. Now, you can do it through multiple tokens, and you can do it through a whole purchase of that asset. Both work in a way or other from an ownership and a payment perspective the same way. Yet, there are big challenges here. And the challenges are being sorted. Some of the challenges are sorted by technology, and technology have looked at and sorted most of those challenges. Remember, the technology we're trying to approach and adopt is something that we need just to adapt to in a way or other, because it is available. So if we need platforms, there is platforms. Platforms to represent that token to the world, to present it to the world, to be able for anyone, or to be possible for anyone to purchase into it. However, let's talk about platforms that deal with that property from a back end. The back end is where the complexity is. Who will manage? How will it be managed? And you tell me, don't we have management systems today and companies that can manage a property in a standardized manner with good quality? Yes, we do. However, property handling, because it involves human beings on the other side, is more complex than handling other products. However, if you can handle a company which also involves humans and involves plenty of humans, and yes, involves legislation, you are able to handle a property which is a smaller and a simpler form of a company. A company is a business. There's owners, shareholders, there's employees, there's clients, and there's customers who buy into that company. Similarly, but simply, a company has an owner, a shareholder, a buyer, has a tenant, which is the customer, but doesn't have any employees. Now, adding a management company there allows that property to have employees. That will add an element of concern, uncertainty, but also will add an element of ease of running. It will add an element of standardization. If Arms & McGregor International Realty is managing a property, and Arms & McGregor International Realty understands how to manage that property, report, how to screen a tenant properly, how to have the tenant also categorized on what quality of tenant, standardizing that because it does impact the categories and the points that we do give, the labeling that we do give to that token at the end of the day, to that fraction at the end of the day. Arms and McGregor is able to handle that property and deliver on the request of the purchaser of that token, deliver on the promise that Arms and McGregor would have displayed for that token. Concentrate with me, please, to understand how does that happen. Let's talk about Tony. And by the way, Tony is one of our attendees. Hi, Tony. Tony, who owns the property today. Tony owns a full property, wants to have this property tokenized because he wants to maintain ownership of a part of it and sell the rest. Or because Tony wishes to sell the property through tokenization because he believes it will allow him to achieve a higher price or step exit the property he owns. Or Tony may have bought the property initially through a digital form. Regardless, Tony today wants to tokenize and sell that property. Tony comes to Arms and McGregor. Arms and McGregor assists him in having tokens to that property. In other words, to having multiple titles linked to digital forms of asset of that property. So that property today can be 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, 3,000, depending on the size of the property and the size of the token we need to produce. Remember, by the way, because I'm sure that many people who are of big understanding of what we're talking about will say, yeah, but that will create a giant risk or a giant risk of legislation that won't happen. I would tell you that yes, but I'm sure there's transitional periods before where that asset will be put under a company and then tokens of shares of that company will be sold. That's not the ultimate, and Realestate 6.0 deals with how do we tokenize the asset itself without passing through a form of structure similar to a company or an SPV. Regardless, before legislation reaches there, I'm sure that legislation will pass through periods which may be indifferent or which may be challenging, but we'll get there eventually. So let's go back to Tony. He owns the asset. He wants to have this asset tokenized. This asset can be tokenized in different ways. Arms and McGregor will come in and will assist him to get that asset tokenized and will create digital formats which represents that either share of an SPV or title, share of the title in the asset, which will be probably the ultimate and the future. And then Arms and McGregor will create the format from the back end to make sure that that asset can simply be understood by a buyer, and the buyer is Makram today, understood wherever Makram is. So that asset goes into that formula. The kind of risk that that asset represents, or the kind of risk that you would live or expected to live investing in that asset, will be clear and will be identified. And definitely here we'll use valuers to identify the kind of risk that's attached to that asset. Arms and McGregor will also look at other elements in the property, in the asset, and simply reflect that in very clear codes. So if the property is A graded or is 5 stars graded, if the risk rating is 3, if the tenancy is solid, if the tenant is solid himself, if the contract is solid, if the return is high, all of those are seen and are standardized through a very clear algorithm and formula that can run everywhere and anywhere. Definitely, there will be the differences. Today, you buy a company share in the US. It's different than buying a company share in Dubai and Lebanon and China. Yeah. So there is differences in how much trust do you put behind the entities verifying all of those details, but behind the legislator verifying those entities. But to go back, Tony has put that property, it has been tokenized by Arms and McGregor. The back end of how the property is managed and how the property is presented and how the property earns has been put clearly through Arms and McGregor. And today you have a token that is online. Again, within the current period and the coming period, that token can be part of a liquidity pot. And then this is how it's traded. In the future, it can be on an open market, and that is how it's traded. Makram is the buyer. He goes on and he sees 50 assets and he says, this asset is identified by 1, 2, 3. Similar to you saying a bond today is AAA graded. Similar to you saying a bond is junk. That all will be clear to Makram, who's trying to buy into that asset. Makram submits an offer, a bid, buys the token. That token after that can be sold by Makram to anyone else on the open market in the same way how Makram bought it. At the end of the day, that ownership is represented by a code, and that purchaser is represented by a verified digital identity. It's as complex as it would be creating all of those support systems, as simple as it is. And I believe that we are so near to get to that. We're so near to get to pay for property properly. It's so easy and simple to achieve what we want to achieve if we adopt technologies that are available, that are currently being used, if we use processes that are currently available, that are used to evaluate much more complex assets and much more complex structures. There's few companies that today are trying and working to tokenize properties. There's few companies today that are working on getting the property transaction possible fully digitally and fully online. There's plenty of technology for us to use that. There is countries like the UAE, like the city of Dubai, that is putting so much effort to reach the smart city formula. And Realestate 6.0 sits in the core of that. There's plenty other countries, guys, that are advanced in that. There's countries like Estonia will shock you on how much do they put an effort on getting the future today. You look at other countries like Germany, Berlin probably is the center of a revolution and evolution every day. The US with plenty of states to talk technology and talk future. Mostly what's important is that we simplify it and we understand it for how simple it is. Realestate 6.0 is not just a concept. It's a way of owning, thinking, trading, living, using, utilizing real estate. And within Realestate 6.0, we talk about the elements and the simplest elements, so the simplest detail. And that's why it looks pretty complex. It's not. It's just simplifying each element, dealing with it, and then moving to another. Actually, Realestate 6.0 helps and deals even with legislators, their fear of such a model. Their fear of such a model because they fear, specifically if you go probably to a Canadian legislator today and you tell them that I want to tokenize all your properties and all your assets. I want to allow, or to an Australian, again, legislator, I want to allow every single person in the world to own a property, to sell a property, to diverse from a property, to trade a property in a certain way. That would create an element of fear to that legislator, because property is seen as a solid block of stability for communities, for people, for families. And it is. And it should and is supposed to stay that way. But let's separate the utility utilization of property, and the ownership and how you pay for property, how you trade property. Yes, there is elements that will change, but as much as risk there is benefits. I'll give you an example. If you see non-stability by allowing people to own tokens of a property, thus property prices going up and down, making it non-possible for local residents to buy a property, or allowing anyone from anywhere in the world to dominate a property market, which is currently possible with the US stock market or any other stock market you have. It is a risk, but the benefits is that a tenant today who wouldn't be able to own a property can at least own part of the property he lives in and get back part of the rent. Now, there is always risks, and with change, knowing that people hate change, legislators hate change even more. We are lucky today to have legislators that are, in a way or other, progressive. And those progressive legislators will act as a case study and will work to achieve a trial that will inspire everyone else, hopefully, to jump on. What we are advocating for is just a simpler method and way of owning, buying, selling, living, using, utilizing, managing property. Allowing a property manager to manage property for less cost, higher efficiency by applying the right kind of technology. Recently, I was part of PropTech Middle East. It's an impressive and interesting conference that runs in the Middle East and runs through PropTech or talks about PropTech. And I was part of a panel, and the guys on that panel were discussing predictive maintenance. We're not anymore in proactive, we're not anymore in reactive, we're in predictive. Allowing us to utilize technology properly, and legislators have a major role in that. VCs and investors have a major role in that. It only has benefits to everyone. Yes, there is challenges that can be, and risk can be mitigated. Can be mitigated to make sure that the average Joe can securely own and trade property. Maybe properties in some markets will not be allowed leverage of 100x, 150x, no issues. Maybe they'll not be allowed except 3 times leverage, similar to how you get to own property today. You get, in general, between 60 and 80% as an LTV. And you can have this on a fraction of a property, maybe. Maybe some markets will not allow leverage at all. Maybe others will allow super leverage, a 300 times leverage. Legislators will need, and several legislators will need to work together, because is it a security that we're buying or is it a property that we're buying? What does that token represent? Or does it represent both? All of those elements should sit together, and it will in the coming few years, hopefully. Realestate 6.0 is there dealing with every single one of those. It's the future of what real estate is like. I've put so much effort today in the last 4 years, and I will be putting so much effort in the future, advocating for the future to be here. Because the future, in my opinion, is now. And the future, in my opinion, is more secure, is safer. The future allows people and kids to dream in India, in Lebanon, in Dubai, in Africa, all over the US, in Venezuela, in Europe, everywhere in the world. Actually, I'm here even after this session. Feel free to book a meeting, and I'll be here to discuss how collaborations can take place to hopefully achieve a better tomorrow, owning and paying for real estate. Thank you for UNISO for this opportunity, for putting this interesting conference together, and ciao.